My dad died suddenly from a heart attack. One moment, he was laughing on the phone with me about fixing the old shed, and the next, I was standing in a hospital hallway being told there was nothing they could do. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I wanted was for Mark to hold me, to tell me it would be okay, even if it wasn't. But Mark didn't reach for me. He didn't wrap his arms around me or stay up at night to talk. He said things like, "I'll handle the bills," or "I'll make sure the mortgage is paid." His eyes were always on his phone, thumbs moving fast, screen lighting up in the dark. I told myself he was just stressed too, that maybe this was his way of coping. But deep down, I felt a cold space growing between us. The day of the funeral, I wore the black dress my dad had once said made me look like my mom when they first met. I stood by his casket, greeting relatives I barely remembered, trying to stay upright. Mark stayed near the back, barely looking my way. When I couldn't see him anymore, I thought maybe he had gone to the bathroom. But when I stepped outside for air, there he was, leaning against the wall, talking to some woman I didn't recognize. They weren't whispering like it was a secret. They were laughing. He glanced at me, quick, almost guilty, but didn't call me over. I didn't know who she was or why they looked so comfortable together, but I was too numb to ask. I went back inside, forcing myself to listen to the pastor's words even though my mind was buzzing. Later that night, I sat on the edge of our bed, holding the folded flag they'd given me in my dad's honor. Mark walked in, dropped his suit jacket on the chair, and said, "Tomorrow we should go over the bank accounts." "Not, how are you holding up?" "Not, do you want to talk?" "Just the bank accounts." Something in me shifted then. My dad had been gone less than a week, and my husband seemed more concerned about money than my grief. I wanted to believe it was just practicality. I wanted to believe he was helping in his own way. But I couldn't shake the image of him outside the funeral, laughing with that woman while my world was falling apart. I didn't cry in front of him. I turned off the light, lay down, and stared at the ceiling until the room blurred. Somewhere between the silence and the glow of his phone in the dark, I started to wonder if I even knew who I had married. A few weeks passed after the funeral, and life felt heavy, like the air around me was always thick. I was still figuring out how to live without Dad, still waking up expecting to see his name on my phone. Mark, however, started acting differently. At first, it was subtle. He'd bring up my father's will in casual conversations, almost like he was just curious. One evening over dinner, he asked, "So, how much did your dad leave you? I mean, roughly." I froze for a second because it felt strange. I hadn't even gone through all the documents yet. "I don't know," I told him, "and I'm not thinking about that right now." He nodded, but later that night, he asked again, this time about the house. "Is the cabin in your name or both our names?" he asked while scrolling through his phone. I told him it was in mine, something Dad had arranged years ago. Mark hummed like he was making mental notes. It was odd, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just trying to help me sort things out. But then the questions kept coming, almost every day. "Does inheritance count as marital property here? If you sell the cabin, would we split the money? Do you think you'll get the life insurance too?" His tone was light, like he was just being curious, but there was an edge to it. I wanted to believe he was just stressed about finances, maybe worried about our future, but it started feeling like a checklist. I'd be folding laundry and he'd walk in, asking about bank accounts. I'd be making coffee and he'd bring up property taxes on the cabin. One night, I couldn't sleep and went to get some water. As I passed the living room, I saw the glow of his laptop. Mark was leaning forward, eyes locked on the screen, completely focused. I almost walked away, but something made me pause. I glanced at the screen. The search bar at the top read, "Divorce after inheritance laws in our state." I froze. My throat went dry, and I stood there long enough for him to notice me. He shut the laptop quickly, like a kid caught doing something wrong. "Couldn't sleep," he said with a fake little smile. "Just reading some stuff." I didn't ask. I didn't even move. My mind was already spinning, but my feet felt stuck to the floor. I told myself maybe it was nothing, maybe he was just curious. But the way he shut that laptop, the way his shoulders tensed, it didn't feel like nothing. I went back to bed, lying awake in the dark, listening to him move around in the other room. From that night on, I noticed every question more sharply. I noticed how his voice changed when he asked about my dad's assets. It wasn't just curiosity, it was calculation. He was building a picture in his head, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know why. And yet, I stayed quiet. I didn't confront him, didn't demand an explanation. Part of me didn't want to believe what I was starting to see. The other part already knew. The rain was coming down hard that morning, tapping against the kitchen windows like it had no intention of stopping. I was still in my robe, hands wrapped around a warm mug, trying to wake up. Mark sat across from me, already dressed for the day, tie neatly in place. He was calm, too calm, like it was any other Tuesday. Without saying much, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the table toward me, his coffee steaming beside him. I looked at it, confused, thinking maybe it was some bill or insurance document. But when I opened it, my hands stopped moving. They were divorce papers. For a second, I just stared at the words on the first page, my brain not quite processing what they meant. When I looked up, Mark was sipping his coffee, watching me like he was waiting for me to sign a receipt. "What is this?" My voice was quieter than I expected. He didn't hesitate. "You'll be fine financially. We both know you can afford to move on." It hit like a slap I hadn't seen coming. My chest tightened, but I couldn't form the words to respond. My father hadn't even been gone a month. I was still waking up expecting to hear his voice, still trying to remember to breathe when the grief felt too heavy. And now this. Mark kept talking, almost casual, like he'd rehearsed it. "It's better to do this now. Clean break. We don't have to drag it out." The papers were already filled out, dates, property lists, even a suggested division of assets. It was like he'd been planning it for a while. My name was typed neatly in all the right places, ready for my signature. I sat there in silence, the sound of rain mixing with the clink of his coffee spoon. I couldn't decide if I wanted to scream or laugh at the absurdity of it. A part of me wanted to ask why now, but I already knew. He thought he was walking away with a fortune. The worst part wasn't the papers themselves. It was how calm he was. No argument, no guilt, no hesitation, just business. I folded the envelope back up and set it on the table without looking at it. My fingers felt cold even though the coffee was still warm in my hand. Mark stood, smoothed his tie, and said, "Think about it. I'll be home late tonight." Then he left. No hug, no second glance. The door closed, and I was alone with the rain and the papers. I didn't cry right then. I just sat there, staring at the wood grain of the table, my mind blank. It wasn't until much later, when the house was silent and the rain had stopped, that the reality of what had just happened sank in. The man I'd built a life with had waited until my world was already shattered and then decided to crush what was left. And he'd done it with the same ease as passing the salt across the table. That night I called my best friend, Jenna. I didn't even know where to start, so I just told her everything. How Mark had handed me the papers like it was nothing, what he'd said, the way he looked at me like I was just a bank account with legs. She listened quietly, letting me spill all the anger and confusion I'd been holding in. "I don't get it," I said, pacing my living room. "It's like he couldn't wait to leave. And for what? We weren't even fighting." Jenna's voice was firm. "Something's off. Nobody does that out of nowhere. He's after something." I wanted to think she was wrong, that maybe Mark had just fallen out of love and handled it badly. But the timing, the questions about my dad's will, it all made her theory sound too possible. A couple nights later, Jenna texted me out of the blue. "Where are you right now?" I told her I was home. She sent another message. "Stay there. I'll call you in a few minutes." When the phone rang, she didn't even say hello. "I'm at O'Malley's," she whispered, her voice low like she didn't want someone to hear. "Mark's here, and you're not going to believe this." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "He's at the bar, laughing with some woman. And," she paused, "he just told her that in a few weeks, they'll have enough money to move somewhere warm and start fresh. He actually said, half the inheritance is more than enough to set us up for life." My whole body went cold. I didn't even realize I was gripping the phone so tightly until my hands started to ache. "That's not all," Jenna continued. "I started recording. I'm sending it to you." Seconds later, my phone buzzed with an audio file. I pressed play, and there it was, Mark's voice, casual and confident, like he was talking about buying a new car. I could hear glasses clinking in the background, a faint laugh from the woman he was with. He went on about how he knew the timing would work out, and how the girl he was talking to wouldn't have to worry about working once the money came. The words hit me harder than the divorce papers had. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't a bad impulse in a moment of grief. He had been planning this, waiting for my dad to die, counting on my loss like it was part of his future. I didn't say much to Jenna after that. I just thanked her, told her to get home safe, and sat there staring at my phone. My chest felt tight, but my mind was strangely clear. Every odd question, every shift in his mood, every late night with his phone, it all made sense now. Mark hadn't just fallen out of love. He'd been waiting, and when my dad's heart stopped, he decided it was the perfect time to break mine too. The next morning, I woke up with Jenna's recording still on my phone and a knot in my stomach. I didn't tell Mark what I knew. I didn't even hint at it. I acted like nothing had changed, but inside, every look he gave me felt different now. I wasn't going to let him know I was onto him. Instead, I spent the day searching online for divorce lawyers. I wanted someone smart, experienced, and impossible to intimidate. After reading through reviews and making a few calls, I found one who had handled high-asset divorces for decades. Her name was Linda. Her voice over the phone was calm but sharp, like she'd seen every dirty trick in the book. We met the next afternoon in her office. It was a quiet place with dark wood shelves and stacks of neatly organized folders. She listened carefully as I told her about the divorce papers, the questions Mark had been asking, and the recording from the bar. I didn't cry. I didn't get emotional. I just told her the facts. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. "First, I want you to understand something very clearly," she said. "In this state, inheritance is separate property. Unless you've put that money into a joint account or used it for marital expenses, your husband has no legal right to it." I felt a small wave of relief, but it didn't last long. "He's going to fight for it anyway," I told her. "He thinks it's his." Linda nodded. "That's fine. Let him try. Your father did you a huge favor without even realizing it. You mentioned he left everything in a trust." "Yes," I said. "He set it up years ago. My name is the only one on it." She smiled for the first time. "Then this is airtight. A properly drafted trust means he can't touch a dime, no matter what he argues. The court will throw out any claim he makes for it." Her certainty made me feel steadier. I'd been carrying around this tight, heavy feeling for weeks, but now I had someone in my corner who knew exactly what to do. Linda went on to explain the steps we'd take, filing our response, gathering evidence, and keeping the trust documents front and center in the case. "Before I left," she said, "don't warn him. Don't argue with him. Let him believe you're unsure about what to do. The more confident he feels, the more mistakes he'll make." I agreed. Walking out of her office, I felt like I'd taken the first real breath in days. I still hated what Mark had done, hated that I had to fight this battle at all, but at least now I knew he wasn't going to win. At home, I kept my face neutral, my tone light, answering his small talk like nothing was wrong. He had no idea that I'd already armed myself with the one thing he didn't have: facts, law, and someone who knew exactly how to use them. One evening, Mark left in a hurry, saying he had a late meeting. His laptop was still on the coffee table, lid halfway closed, the screen faintly glowing. Normally, he carried it everywhere, but this time, he didn't even glance back at it. I sat there for a few minutes, telling myself to ignore it. But then I thought about the recording, about everything Linda had told me. I reached for the laptop and lifted the lid. The screen was still open to his email. At first, it was just the usual: work messages, spam, random updates. But then I saw a folder labeled personal. Inside were several emails from someone named Clare. My stomach tightened. The messages weren't vague or friendly. They were filled with plans, little jokes, and promises. In one, he wrote, "Once the settlement is done, we can finally get out of here. I found a place in Florida with a pool and a guest house. Perfect for us." Another email from her said, "I can't wait until it's just you and me. No more sneaking around." She had even attached photos of a house listing. Scrolling further, I found bank statements. There were transfers from our joint account into one I'd never seen before, all marked with vague notes like investment or saving. The amounts weren't small. This wasn't him just tucking away a little extra. It was deliberate, planned, and hidden. I took screenshots of everything: emails, bank transfers, property listings, and sent them straight to my own email. Then I forwarded them to Linda with a short note. "Found this tonight. Thought you should see it." After sending everything, I closed the laptop exactly how I found it, even adjusting the angle of the lid. I sat back on the couch, heart still racing, listening for the sound of his car in the driveway. When he finally came home, I smiled like nothing was different. I asked about his meeting, laughed at his dumb joke, and poured him a drink. He didn't notice anything. Not the change in my voice, not the way I kept my hands steady on purpose. Inside, though, I felt something new: control. For weeks, he'd been the one with a plan, moving pieces behind my back. But now, I had the truth, and I had proof. He thought he was building a future with her on my father's money. He thought I was too naive to see it coming. Let him think that. The longer he stayed comfortable, the harder it would hit him when it all fell apart. The morning of the hearing, the sky was clear and bright, nothing like the heavy way I felt inside. I arrived early with Linda, both of us quiet as we walked into the courthouse. Mark showed up a few minutes later, stepping out of his car like he was arriving at a party. He wore a brand new suit, shiny shoes, and a smile that looked almost rehearsed. He didn't even glance at me as he walked in. His lawyer, a tall man with an expensive briefcase, greeted him with a firm handshake. I could see them laughing together in the hallway before the judge called us in. Inside the courtroom, Mark sat back in his chair like he already knew he'd won. His lawyer started speaking right away, explaining to the judge how Mark was entitled to an equal share of the inheritance. He spoke confidently, sliding documents across the table, as if this was just routine. Linda waited patiently, letting him finish. She didn't rush or interrupt. When it was her turn, she stood and spoke in the same calm tone she'd used in her office the first day I met her. "Your Honor," she began, "the claim presented today ignores the basic property laws of this state. Inheritance is separate property unless it is commingled. My client has kept her inheritance in a trust created by her late father, which was drafted and finalized years before this marriage. She handed the judge a set of neatly bound documents. This trust is legally airtight. It lists my client as the sole beneficiary, and there is no evidence, because none exists, that these funds were ever shared as marital property. Mark shifted in his seat, his smile faltering a little. His lawyer tried to speak, but Linda continued, her voice steady. Additionally, Your Honor, we have evidence of bad faith in the filing of this claim. That's when she brought out the printed email. She didn't look at Mark as she handed them over. The judge flipped through the pages, his eyebrows lifting slightly. Linda explained how the emails showed Mark's intent to use the settlement to fund a new life with another woman, and how he had been transferring funds from the joint account without my knowledge. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft rustle of papers as the judge turned each page. Mark's face turned a shade darker, and he started shifting uncomfortably in his chair. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Mark kept glancing toward me, his jaw tightening. When the judge spoke again, his tone was firm. This court finds no legal basis for the claim to the inheritance. The trust stands. Furthermore, given the evidence of bad faith and the attempt to mislead the court, the petitioner will be responsible for the respondent's legal fees. Mark's head snapped toward the judge. What? The words slipped out before his lawyer could stop him. The judge didn't respond, simply moving on to finalize the ruling. By the time the hearing ended, the smug expression Mark had worn walking in was gone. His face was tight, his shoulders tense, and his expensive suit didn't make him look powerful anymore. As we walked out, I didn't say a word to him. I didn't need to. The silence between us was enough, and in that silence, I knew he finally understood. His plan hadn't just failed. It had blown up in front of everyone. The judge's final words echoed in the quiet courtroom, and it took a moment for them to sink in. My side had won completely. There would be no split, no settlement, no share of my father's trust going into Mark's pocket. On top of that, the judge made it clear, Mark would have to pay every cent of my legal fees. I saw the flicker of disbelief on his face, like he still couldn't process it. His lawyer was already packing up, avoiding eye contact. The sound of the gavel seemed to snap the moment in half. It was over. From where I sat, I could see the woman sitting in the back row. I recognized her from the photos in the emails, Clare. She was dressed like she'd come to a celebration, a thin smile on her face when she walked in earlier. But now that smile was gone. She was staring at Mark with wide eyes, like she had just been handed news she didn't want to believe. Linda leaned toward me and whispered, "Watch her." A moment later, Claire stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She turned sharply and walked out, her heels clicking fast on the polished wood. She didn't even glance back. Mark's eyes followed her for a second, but he didn't get up. He couldn't. The court clerk was already handing him papers with the breakdown of what he owed. I knew enough to understand that between his own legal bills and now mine, the number was big. Very big. When we stepped out into the hallway, the tension seemed to follow him like a shadow. He pulled out his phone and started dialing, speaking in a low, frantic voice. I didn't need to hear the words to know who he was calling. The way his hand clenched at his side told me everything. She wasn't picking up. Linda handed me a copy of the ruling, her expression calm but satisfied. "You did well," she said. "Now let him deal with the mess he made." We walked toward the exit, and I couldn't help glancing back once. Mark was still standing in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, a look of panic replacing the confidence he'd strutted in with that morning. Outside, the air felt lighter. The sun was warm, the kind of warmth that seeps into your skin after days of gray skies. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, letting it hit me, realizing it was finally done. There were no more questions to answer, no more games to play. The truth was out in the open, and his plan had crumbled in front of the judge, in front of me, and in front of the woman he thought would be waiting for. Somewhere inside, I imagined the conversation he'd have to have with her, the one where he'd explain that instead of walking away with a fortune, he was walking away with debt. That the dream house in Florida was gone, the easy life they talked about vanished before it began. As Linda and I walked to her car, I didn't look back again. Whatever happened next for him was his problem. All I knew was that I was free, and he was left holding the weight of everything he had tried to take from me. A few days after the hearing, I sat at my desk with my laptop open. The copy of Jenna's recording and the screenshots of the emails were right there in a folder. I had been holding on to them for weeks, but now that the court case was over, I didn't have to keep them hidden. I opened a private Facebook group I shared with mutual friends, people we'd known for years, some even from before we were married. The group was closed, only a few dozen members, but I knew that anything posted there had a way of finding its way around. I typed a short message. It wasn't angry or emotional, just plain facts. For everyone wondering why Mark and I divorced, here's the truth. This is what he said, and these are his plans in his own words. Then I attached the audio file from the bar and the screenshots of his emails with Claire. For a moment, I hesitated. Once I hit post, there was no going back. But then I thought about all the lies he had probably been telling behind my back, the image he tried to keep up, and how easily he had planned to take what wasn't his. I clicked post and closed my laptop. It didn't take long. My phone buzzed with notifications within minutes. Private messages, shocked comments, people tagging others. Friends who hadn't spoken to me in months were sending me long paragraphs, apologizing for ever believing his side of the story. By the end of the day, the post had been shared outside the group. I didn't spread it myself. Others did it for me. The audio was damning. Mark's voice bragging about half the inheritance and promising a new life to someone else while I was still grieving. The emails only made it worse. There was no way to twist the meaning, no room for excuses. The next morning, I got a call from an old coworker. "You should know," she said quietly. "Everyone at his office has heard it. They're talking about it in the break room." He didn't even show up today. Later, word reached me that his own family had seen the post. His sister unfriended him online and sent me a message saying she was ashamed of what he'd done. His mother, who had always been polite but distant with me, left a comment under the post. "I raised you better than this." The snowball kept rolling. People who used to praise him stopped answering his calls. A couple of mutual friends sent me screenshots of him trying to defend himself in private chats, claiming it was all taken out of context. But nobody seemed to believe him. The proof was too clear. By the end of the week, his polished reputation was gone. The man who had walked into court so confident was now the subject of whispered conversations and pointed looks. And I didn't have to do anything more. The truth was out there, and it was doing exactly what truth does. It stuck and it spread. I didn't celebrate out loud, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing he couldn't hide behind charm or lies anymore. He had built his plans on greed, and now everyone could see exactly what kind of man he really was. The day after my post made its rounds, I called a locksmith. By noon, the locks on every door were changed. I didn't tell Mark. If he tried to come by, he'd find out the hard way. His things had been boxed up weeks earlier, labeled, and pushed into the garage. The house felt different once the new keys were in my hand. Quieter, safer, like it finally belonged to me again. I walked through each room slowly, checking windows, touching walls, letting myself imagine what it would be like without his presence lingering in every corner. The next week, I met with a realtor. The marital home had always been more his taste than mine, big, polished, and impersonal. Selling it felt like letting go of the last thread tying us together. We had a buyer within days, and when the final papers were signed, the proceeds went straight into my account. Every cent stayed with me. Before I left the house for the last time, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a small gift box. Inside, I placed a printed copy of the court ruling, folded neatly, along with a note I'd written on plain white paper. Half of nothing is still nothing. I addressed the box to him and dropped it off at the shipping counter on my way out of town. 2 days later, I loaded up my car. There wasn't much, just clothes, a few boxes, and my dad's old fishing rod. The coastal cabin was only a few hours' drive, tucked away in a quiet spot my dad had loved. He used to talk about it like it was his own secret escape, a place where life slowed down and the air smelled like salt and pine. As I drove, the road narrowed and curved along the water. The farther I went, the lighter I felt. The grief over losing my dad was still there, but it didn't feel tangled up with anger anymore. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't bracing for the next betrayal. When I reached the cabin, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The place was simple, wooden walls, wide windows, the sound of waves in the distance. I opened the curtains and let the sunlight spill across the floor. Standing there, I realized this was the ending I'd been waiting for. Not the end of my father's story, not the end of my marriage, but the end of carrying all the weight they'd left behind. I closed the door behind me, hearing the lock click into place. This time, it wasn't to keep someone out. It was to keep my peace in. Do you think Mark got exactly what he deserved, or do you think she went too far by exposing him and cutting him off completely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your opinion. And if you want more betrayal and revenge stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one.